How much can Canada spend, according to Codera Analytics? So Canada's operating deficit is on the order of 1% of GDP, significantly less than that of the US and China. So we're in a relatively stable financial position. With Trump's trade war looming, however, it's apparent this situation will be changing for the worse.
The Rational View is a weekly series hosted by me, Dr. Alan Scott, providing a rational, evidence-based perspective on important societal issues.
Produced by Soapbox Media.
The world needs evidence-based public policy now more than ever. Making the right decisions should not be partisan politics. Please help spread The Rational View by going to patron.podbean.com/The Rational View. Together, we can make a better future.
Hello and welcome to another episode of The Rational View. This will be my Canadian election review podcast. As of the time of this episode, Canada is just a couple of weeks away from a federal election. And The Rational View is here to provide you with a rundown on the major parties. In Canada, we have two major parties, the Liberals and the Conservatives, who are the only parties who have ever won elections. Plus, we have a third party, the New Democrats, who usually manage to capture a smattering of seats, plus a couple smaller ones, the Greens, the Bloc Québécois, various other ones. I had a podcast recently introducing one of the new parties. The last two terms in Canada were won by the Liberals under Justin Trudeau. The most recent term has been a minority government where the Liberals did not capture a majority of seats, but their government was propped up by the New Democratic Party in return for concessions to social programs. Now, I hope you like what you're hearing. Please press like on your podcast app if you do enjoy this. And I'd love to hear your feedback on my Facebook group. Let me know what you think about this, who you might support, whether I've got anything wrong. Trudeau, whose popularity has been rather low after 10 years in government, has recently stepped down as leader of the Liberal Party and Prime Minister of Canada, which is a rare thing. And he's been replaced by Mr. Mark Carney, who is the former governor of the Bank of Canada and the Bank of England. Carney, a real international type person, has reinvigorated Liberal polling numbers and is currently leading Pierre Poilievre's Conservative Party. While the Liberals are sitting at 43%, the Conservatives are currently sitting at 39% in recent Nanos polling. And this was a major surprise to Conservatives who were kind of a shoo-in based on polls. The 20-point lead up until Trudeau stepping down. Trudeau was very unpopular, and the Conservatives had waged a campaign of hate and anger, stoking the flames to get him to step down, and he did. And once that happened, the polling numbers reversed. They were a shoo-in until Carney announced his candidacy and flipped the script. So, what have we been seeing in Canada? Well, all three major parties have been putting out ads. The Conservative ads have been trying to smear the new Liberal leader, Mark Carney, as a rich outsider who's going to bring in a carbon tax. There have been AI-generated fake pictures showing up on social media showing Carney with Epstein and Maxwell. The Liberal ads have been comparing the Conservative leader to Donald Trump due to him sharing similar rhetoric on making Canada great again. Canada's broken. Liberal extremists, all of that sort of right-wing media campaign stuff. And the NDP have been going on about what they would like to do for Canadians and how well they've done in getting social programs implemented under the current Liberal government. I'm going to go through what the candidates have said about actual policies and what the parties have on their websites. In case you're interested in that, it's time for a rational view. So, one thing in common of all the parties, they all support an increase in Canadian defense spending, which has been a place where we've lagged our NATO 2% requirement. And, all of the parties have investments aimed to reinforce northern sovereignty with climate change. Shipping lanes are opening up. This is becoming a big focus. Canada needs to have icebreakers, military bases, presence in the north, and all of the parties seem to be interested in this. So it seems that Trump's saber rattling is having an effect on getting Canada to invest more in its flagging military. The Liberals have also said that they would review the purchase of the U.S. F-35 strike fighters, and the NDP said that they would actually cancel the planned procurement worth billions of dollars. So I want to go through each party's platform in a little bit more detail for you and try to get to the facts and what they've actually said, rather than the focusing on what the media seems to focus on, personalities more than facts, and faux pas and personal interactions, rather than the platforms, which is what we need to talk about. Platforms are what's important, not the hairstyles of the rich and famous. So, starting with the Conservatives, I want to introduce the leaders a little bit, and also the platforms, because obviously the leaders have a say in how things will go. So Pierre Poilievre is the leader of the Conservatives, a relatively young career politician. He's been sort of an ideological bulldog in Parliament under Stephen Harper, the previous Conservative Prime Minister. He was mainly sent to ridicule the opposition in defense of Harper policies during question period. He seems to be a neoliberal-leaning fan of free markets against government regulation and all that comes with that. He criticizes liberal spending and warns of inflation. He, during his tenure as a member of Parliament, voted against gay marriage when that issue came up for a vote. He also took an unpopular position to support the truckers' protest, where they were protesting against restrictions on freedoms that were destroying their livelihoods, at the point where COVID had admittedly become an endemic, and further restrictions were probably quite unscientific. And this protest spurred the government to relax some of the bans and restrictions. And Poilievre supported them, leaning into the divisiveness, while Justin Trudeau was vilifying these protesters and felt it necessary to invoke emergency measures to suspend their rights and bank accounts. Poilievre, leader of the opposition, obviously took the opposite stance. And I think, that's a good thing, and many people will disagree with me. Poilievre correctly points out, and I want to touch on housing because it's an issue in Canada, and especially Canada. We've had a lot of immigration. Poilievre correctly points out that the current housing crisis has been exacerbated by the Liberals, the Liberal government, who ramped up immigration levels to take in war refugees from Syria and Ukraine, but without any corresponding plan for addressing the housing and infrastructure impacts. And this has really had an impact on Canada's economy, on Canada's housing. Much of the online discussion about GDP shows that Canada per capita GDP has increased lowest of any of the G20. However, the absolute GDP has increased significantly better, but the problem is that we've let in, hundreds of thousands of immigrants. So the GDP numbers have been eroded by the impact. The housing plan that the Conservatives have put together calls for elimination of GST, goods and services tax, on homes under $1.3 million and new rental units. Cities would be punished for not meeting a cumulative 15% increase in year-over-year home building rates by withholding federal grants. And there would be a formula for giving them more money if they exceed these targets. The Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation staff will also be punished if they drag their feet on project approvals by not getting bonuses and having their salaries slashed. Poilievre would furthermore sell off 15% of federally owned buildings so the land can be used to build affordable homes. Conservatives have also announced that they would slash foreign aid and business support and the federal workforce to save money. In their online policy document, which I went through in relatively quickly because it's a big document, they say they are committed to repaying the debt and will block they seem to be somewhat anti-union. They'll block mandatory union membership, as freedom for workers will break their unions. They support elected senators, which is, I think, probably not a bad thing. Currently, Canada's senators are appointed by the Prime Minister. We don't have elected senators. We have this group of appointed senators with no real power. They review bills and provide some inputs into the bills, but they aren't similar to U.S. senators where they're elected and have equal power to the House. Conservatives support more free votes in the House, and they want to simplify the tax code and reduce taxes. Conservatives would abolish supervised consumption sites and promote recovery and rehab. Now that is, I think, probably a good thing, promoting recovery and rehab. My feeling, though, is that in most cases, they just don't like handing out drugs, and supervised consumption sites rub them the wrong way. I would be very surprised if they do promote recovery and rehab to any significant level, although it certainly is necessary. There are not enough recovery beds available for the drug addiction crisis. One thing I found that I really liked on their platform, they support a unified government approach to funding big science projects. Now, currently, the funding regime for big science is just non-existent in Canada. We have a lot of small ministries that are, that have different aspects of funding. There's a space agency, there's NRC for funding scientists, but there's no real budget available for big science projects. And what you have to do is typically lobby your MP. And if you get enough lobbying together, you can maybe get a big project into play. So the Conservative policy platform supports a unified government approach, a single point of interface to funding these big science projects, which, are particularly important and far between due to and then, you can't plan for them because there is no repeat funding for these things. It's all based on lobbying mainly. They support reducing foreign ownership rules on airlines and media. So allowing more foreign investment, more foreign ownership of things that have been somewhat protected, like airlines and the media. And this also flows into their idea that they want to defund the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, although they said they would keep Radio Canada funded. The Conservatives will not implement a federal carbon framework, which currently is in place. So they'll roll back federal carbon rules. Much of their vote support is in oil-rich Western Canada, and it's not clear whether they would implement anything to meet treaty obligations such as the Paris Accord, where Canada has committed to carbon caps or carbon pollution caps. They do support building east-west pipelines in Canada to get Alberta oil to markets other than the U.S. This has been a problem in the past, of course, because Aboriginals, British Columbia and Quebec provinces have consistently objected to building new pipelines through their territory. In fact, there's an oil tanker ban along the north coast of British Columbia where Aboriginal people live, and it's kind of a beautiful nature reserve. The Conservatives plan to reverse the Liberal oil tanker ban that would affect these territories so that they could build ports to take oil to market off the west coast of Canada. They are supportive of nuclear power, so that's a very pragmatic, clean energy position. Also, that I found in their policy manual, they're against euthanasia and assisted death, which I don't resonate with this so much. I think that's a poorly thought out policy. They're proposing a 3-year prohibition on human embryo research due to unclear reasons. Perhaps I think they mention it stems from respect of human life, but prohibiting human embryo research actually endangers human life rather than respecting it. So I'm not sure I understand that one. They have a policy where they want to prohibit life-altering surgeries for persons under 18 suffering gender dysphoria. Now, this has been a hot-button topic for quite a few people. In the doctors have been pushing these transition surgeries on young people, prior to puberty, which have had dangerous and not well understood impacts. And these are not reversible things that you're doing. This is worse than just getting a tattoo. So I think there's some wisdom in slowing down these across the board prohibition. I don't know if that is fair. I know it's ideological, but I don't know if that is the best approach. I think certainly we need to slow down on doing something that many people under the age of 18 aren't really certain and don't understand where they are, and allowing them to make these life-altering changes before they can drink alcohol, before they can drive cars. This is something I think that needs to be discussed a little bit more, and I think that slowing down on these surgeries is good. My discussion with I had a discussion with a scientist who was aware of the impacts of these surgeries on people, and he was heavily against these things because it basically can be a problem in later life and is not necessarily safe. The Conservatives support a preferred interest rate on student loans, which I think is a very good thing. And as I said, they want to defund the CBC but keep Radio-Canada. So that's kind of an overview of the Conservative platform. Now I'm going to move on to the Liberals, and last I'll finish up with the New Democratic Party, which is kind of the minority party in Canadian politics. So who's Mark Carney? He earned a PhD in economics, was a banker at Goldman Sachs. Not a great thing. He was widely praised for his stewardship of the Bank of Canada during the 2008 subprime mortgage collapse and the subsequent collapse of capitalism. He was the head of the Bank of England following his success, and he ended up there during Brexit to guide the Bank of England through such difficult times. He's been chair of the Financial Stability Board for 7 years and a regular at G20 meetings. He was a UN Special Envoy for Climate Change and launched the Glasgow Alliance for Net Zero. So definitely someone who is progressive in terms of his climate views and conservative perhaps in his financial positions. So he fits the bill of what I would call a progressive conservative, which is a party that used to be in Canada until it merged with the Reform Party to become the Conservative Party, no longer without the word progressive in their names. So the Liberals have now swung to be the progressive Conservatives to the right, and the Conservatives have moved further to the right to be just the progressive Conservatives are now just the Conservatives. So Mark Carney, looking at his platform, he wants to spend less and invest more. seems vague and intelligent, I guess, vague and wise in a vague way. The Liberals would aim to balance government operational spending within 3 years while running a small deficit. Of course, this is something that Trudeau also said he would do and did not. He ran a relatively large deficit, but one must also caveat that with, they had to deal with COVID and, not paying to support the populace during that would have made it a much more difficult situation for most Canadians. So, going into housing policy, which is one of the key issues in this election, Carney's Liberals have promised to create an entity called Build Canada Homes, BCH, that would act as a developer overseeing the construction of affordable housing in Canada. So the Liberal plan is to make another government agency. No, this is going to be a standalone arm's length company. He describes it as a lean, mission-driven organization. He'll provide tens of billions in financing for new affordable housing projects across the company. BCH will supply $25 billion in debt financing and $1 billion in equity financing to innovative Canadian prefabricated home builders. So following the the World War II housing plan, building lots of prefab small homes quickly. A Liberal Party backgrounder explained that BCH will also issue bulk orders of housing units from Canadian modular and prefabricated home builders in order to create sustained demand. A mix of grants and loans to the tune of $4 billion will be directed into long-term fixed-rate financing for affordable homes, and $6 billion in grants will be earmarked for quickly building deeply affordable housing, supportive housing, Indigenous housing, and shelters. And alongside this are several detailed directives and tax incentives to cut development fees and assist home buyers. So a very detailed plan, and it seems on the surface like it could be effective. I worry a bit about the costs of all these promises and whether they are able to balance the budget. But I worry the same about the Conservatives because they usually have bigger tax breaks for the rich, and they also don't balance the budget. Nobody balances the budget. It's a loser for an elected parliament. Liberals have a focus on clean energy. Carney's definition of clean energy includes nuclear energy. So in 2022, he told a Brookfield conference that net zero is not possible without nuclear energy. So he is a pragmatist. He will offer incentives to residents for green choices and will make polluters pay. His government would introduce measures to speed up energy projects, but would allow Quebec to veto any pipelines through its territory. They would implement a carbon border adjustment tariffs on countries that don't have similar industrial carbon pricing systems to maintain an even competitive playing field for those industries in Canada that are paying for their carbon emissions. So what else do we know about Carney? As chairman of Brookfield Asset Management, he owned upwards of $6.8 million in stock options at the end of December and has placed his assets into a blind trust. He's been a little bit cagey about, what he's owning and what his financial wherewithal is. He recently advised Brookfield to move its headquarters to the USA from Canada, and that did not play well in Canada. But it didn't seem to stick as a negative. Brookfield is known for buying companies in carbon-intensive areas to ostensibly decarbonize them. They bought Westinghouse, the nuclear energy company. So he's very aware of energy issues. He's also aware of inequality in society. In his 2021 book, Values, Building a Better World for All, he paints himself as a strong believer in markets, but acknowledges they need to be regulated for there to be decent outcomes. So I think that is a big contrast with the neoliberal idea that hands-off markets will save us all, and 2008 crash of capitalism didn't happen. Carney is aware of the damaging impact of the growing inequality between rich and poor. He understands that relative equality is good for growth and that more equal societies are more resilient, are more likely to invest for the many and not the few. But he fails to link that back to the causes of inequality. He hesitates to look closely at the difference between value creation and value extraction, perhaps unwilling to bear a portion of blame accruing to our oligarchic overlords in the finance industry. In his book, he prods excessive executive compensation without going so far as to call for higher top marginal tax rates or other measures that would compress the income distribution, like, for instance, stronger unions. In short, he's not a harbinger of change. He is a status quo banker, financier who knows very well how to navigate the economic system, especially in times of crisis. Now on to the NDP. So the NDP is led by Jagmeet Singh, a lawyer and human rights activist. He used to work in retail while he was putting himself through university. He's a defender of unions and is against precarious work. His party were responsible for supporting the minority liberal government of Justin Trudeau, and as a result, were able to push through several amendments to the Canadian social net. Pharmacare programs were pushed through. Universal dental care was pushed into Canada's healthcare coverage regime. They got anti-scab legislation passed for unions. So what is their current platform? The NDP planned to spend $16 billion over 4 years incentivizing new home builds. And that's not unlike the totals that the Liberals were talking about. They want to freeze development costs, eliminate exclusionary zoning, allow at least 4 units in residential lots, and introduce a renter's bill of rights. So, yeah, that seems reasonable. They would introduce legislation to stop foreign billionaire-backed investors from buying up Canadian companies and then selling off the parts and abandoning Canadian workers, which does happen and has happened, and we're likely to see that happen in the future as the auto market disintegrates under the tariffs. The NDP want to put workers' rights ahead of investors in bankruptcy proceedings, which I think also is a very progressive choice, because we saw it happen to all the Nortel workers when that company went bankrupt. They want to introduce policies to incentivize provinces with an additional 1% health transfer to ensure more Canadians have access to a family doctor. That's a bit of a problem in our universal healthcare system, is that we don't have enough family doctors, and not enough doctors are going into general practitioners. They get paid more as specialists, and money's a little bit tight under the system. So I think that's a somewhat expensive but useful idea. They will mandate government agencies to buy Canadian-made cars and invest in infrastructure projects. So yeah, this is also good. I think Buy Canadian is a necessary way to go in this realm of trade wars. The NDP will invest in clean energy home retrofits for low-income households. They, similar to the Liberals, will eliminate the consumer carbon tax, but keep an industrial carbon price. Their goal is to cut back on $18 billion in fossil fuel subsidies, but they haven't outlined how that's going to happen. And they also will introduce a border carbon adjustment or tariff to allow a level playing field in Canada with imports. NDP, however, this sounds great and forward-thinking and all, but NDP, of all of the major parties, has dragged its feet on supporting clean nuclear energy, which, most people who have an awareness of the energy and the physics and the engineering requirements of reliable energy grids have agreed that nuclear energy is definitely required. We've seen the collapse of the German energy infrastructure leading to the Russian invasion of Ukraine and dependence on Russian gas. And, it's a debacle. We don't want to copy that. So I'm a little bit disappointed with the NDP on their foot dragging on nuclear energy. Their 2021 policy document includes halting nuclear expansion. Instead, they are pushing for an east to west clean energy grid in Canada, including investments in solar, wind, geothermal, and wave energy. They have no policy plans to incentivize new oil and gas pipelines. So they're, basically hard over on the climate emergency and net zero, but without the strongest tool in the box, nuclear. So I would expect that you would see a lot of wasted money on energy under an NDP government, but likely that's not going to happen, thankfully. So to address a little bit about how much this is all going to cost, I looked around on the web at, tax policies and economic adjustments, and the Center for Policy Alternatives has reviewed party economic adjustments and tax policy. And here's what they have to say. The NDP proposals provide roughly the same tax savings across all income groups, about $500 average per tax filer. The average benefits would be about twice as much for lower income earners making between $14,000 and $31,000 a year. The Conservative Party proposal provides the largest benefit to the richest 30% of income earners, who would reap about $700 on average in tax savings. The Conservatives' tax cut plan provides almost no savings to Canada's lowest income earners, and their new tax exemption for seniors' working income would have almost no effect on most seniors. The Liberals' plan is identical to the Conservatives, except the richest 30% of Canadians would save about $300 on average. Low-income Canadians, again, would get essentially nothing from their measures. And the cheapest program would be the Liberal one, costing $5.4 billion in 2025, reinforcing the idea of Carney's fiscal responsibility. The Conservative package costs more than twice that, $12.2 billion. However, they want to save that by slashing foreign aid and federal government size. Despite raising money through the capital gains rate, the NDP measures would have a net cost of $17 billion a year. What does all this spending mean? How much can Canada spend? Can we afford deficits? How much should we be worried about paying back the debt? Well, in an inflationary scenario, paying back the debt is not the best solution, because over time, the value of the debt becomes devalued in a continuing inflationary scenario. And what you really look for in financial systems is the ratio of debt to gross domestic product as a figure of merit. So where does Canada stand in its debt? As of 2023, Canada has kind of a middle-of-the-road debt-to-GDP ratio compared to other G20 nations, similar to the UK and France, but lower than US, Italy, and Japan, according to Codera Analytics. So Canada's operating deficit is on the order of 1% of GDP, significantly less than that of the US and China. So we're in a relatively stable financial position. With Trump's trade war looming, however, it's apparent that this situation will be changing for the worse. So there you have it. I've laid out what I see as some, important points, important platform points from all of the major parties in Canada. I want you to make your decision. Get out there and vote. And I hope you got something out of this, learned something about the parties, and maybe this can help you make your decision, like I have to make mine. Thanks for listening to The Rational View.
If you'd like to follow up with more in-depth discussions, please come find us on Facebook at The Rational View and join our discussion group. If you like what you're hearing, please consider visiting my Patreon page at patron.podbean.com/therationalview. Thanks for listening.